And now we're going to move on to some of the social activists and in relation to the fossil fuel divestment movement. It's been very noticeable in relation to the climate change debate, how students have been leaders of many of the fossil fuel divestment movements focused on educational institutions and universities. And students have also been kind of playing a kind of a role in some forms of climate litigation, like some of the litigation going on from students against Harvard University, but also increasingly in relation to things like atmospheric trust litigation. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Carly Baque.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rimmer. Cool. Okay, firstly, I just acknowledge that we're standing or sitting on Yagara and Turrbal country, and sovereignty was never ceded, and also that First Nations peoples play a vital and pivotal role in the climate justice movement. Okay. So yeah, first up, just because we're a grassroots group, we always appreciate all the social media attention that we can get. So feel free to tag Fossil Free Universities and Fossil Free QUT in any of the photos that you're taking today. Thank you to Carol and Robin for really talking about the theories behind divestment. And I really thought that I'd talk about what's happening on the grassroots and who fossil-free universities are and who the students who are pushing for divestment in higher education, what they're actually doing on the ground. So Fossil-Free Universities is a global movement comprised of students, staff and alumni who are encouraging their own university to divest its endowment fund from fossil fuel companies. Currently, there are 18 fossil-free university groups in Australia, and each campus group has autonomy over the direction that group takes, as every institution is different, and every individual and group also has a unique set of skills and passion to tackle the climate crisis. And that's really one of the reasons why I joined Fossil Free QUT to start off with. So despite the fact that each group fossil-free campus group is different, we generally have three asks of the decision makers of our university, so that the Vice-Chancellors implement a 5-year transition plan away from fossil fuel investments, that they provide greater transparency around all of their investments, and also that they freeze all new investments in coal, oil and gas. So just a snapshot of what higher education divestment has looked like. ANU in 2012 was the real first triumph for the fossil-free movement, and they decided to partially divest. Then there's been a resurgence in 2016, as you can see, with the University of Sydney partially divesting, Monash divesting from coal, and then in May we had La Trobe University, which was the first university in Australia to commit to transitioning away from coal, oil and gas. And then in September, a little bit of a surprise to Fossil Free QUT, QUT committed to an orderly and considered transition away from fossil fuel investments. So, what do we do? Each campus's main goal, as I've already talked about, is full fossil fuel divestment, and each group employs a number of different tactics to achieve that goal. So we use open letters, petitions, creative stunts, and film screenings. And I've just put up a little bit of a simple power structure that we tend to do every semester, so that we are really organising and strategising effectively. So our theory of change, really to stigmatise the fossil fuel industry, is first of all target students and community members more broadly, and that way they're able to influence the alumni and academics and the QUT executive directors of each individual university, who then have the power to actually influence the Vice-Chancellor and the QUT, in our case the QUT Council's decisions. Okay, so just a little bit of a snapshot of how Fossil Free QUT encouraged this university to consider divestment. First up, QUT invests through the Queensland Investment Corporation, so their endowment portfolio is about $300 million, and a portion of that is invested in fossil fuel companies. So in 2015, semester one, that's really when it was actually end of 2014 when the campaign started, but in 2015 is when we really got organised and had a campaign organiser and that sort of thing. So we had a student petition, and that gained over 1,000 student signatures. Then we ramped up the campaign, and in semester two, we had an academic open letter where we received 120 academic signatures in 2 days, which was just a phenomenal response. And from that, that then encouraged the QUT sort of like board of directors to employ a subcommittee, the Investments and Borrowings Committee, which would then specifically look at and discuss every few months the investments that QUT was investing in. So actually two sides of we weren't really sure if that was like another level of bureaucracy or whether they were actually considering divesting. And then semester one, 2016, for the semester we really wanted to have a student club's open letter to show the overall community support for divestment. But also because there was that subcommittee, the Investments and Borrowings Committee, we decided that at each meeting we would go there outside and we would protest and really encourage the university to keep considering divestment from lots of different angles, just like Carol and Robin have talked about, the economic, the political, the social justice avenues. We also attended student forums where we knew that the Vice-Chancellor would be, and we kept asking questions about why the university hadn't considered divesting because of all of the reasons that have been discussed. Then there was the Flood the Campus, which was the first sort of national convergence, I guess, of all of the different fossil-free university groups across Australia. And I think just as Robin was saying before, we're not acting as individuals, we're acting collectively. And it showed great power when the fossil-free university groups came together, and there were 3 university groups who actually sat in on their vice-chancellors in their offices and really created a whole week of flooding the campus and saying that the climate crisis is an imminent issue and that students really care about our futures, and we also care about the futures also, obviously so many different reasons. Actually, I'll get to that later on about why all of these students do the things that we do, because we all come from different backgrounds and we all study various different topics, from chemical engineering right through to economics and philosophy, and all of these different sort of streams mean that we all are very passionate about different outcomes of what we want a decarbonised economy to look like. Anyway, going back to this, the last action that we actually took part in was a little bit of a blockade against the Mining and Energy Symposium that this university decided was a good idea to host. We think that mining and energy in 2025 will be railed back very quickly. And we think that just talking about sort of greenwashing the sector isn't good enough. If we're to stop this climate crisis, then we need to keep at least 80% of all fossil fuels in the ground, and that means no new coal mines, and it definitely means trying to transition now towards a clean energy economy. So then off the back of that, just recently really, we thought we would combine all of the petitions, all of the open letters, and have a community-wide open letter. So we invited lots of the community to a film screening of Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything. But then we also wanted to focus more on the transparency issue, which is sometimes left out of the divestment movement, because, especially for me, transparency is a huge issue amongst all universities. Fossil Free QUT has never been allowed to even watch any of the QUT Council board meetings. And yeah, I think that's a huge systemic issue which is the reason why lots of social change doesn't happen at universities, because we aren't allowed to sit at the table, and we aren't even allowed to watch what happens behind closed doors. And then I think because of all the pressure in semester one, because we were so persistent, we were consistently attending or standing outside all of the QUT council meetings and the Investments and Borrowings Committee meetings, and persistently going to events that we knew the Vice-Chancellor would be at, and kept questioning him on why the university hadn't divested. Eventually, somebody or a group of people from the QUT council decided it was time to really take a moral, economic and political approach and consider divestment. Cool. So what's really interesting is that when ANU divested a couple of years ago, Australia's Treasurer Joe Hockey weighed in and described ANU as removed from the reality of what is helping to drive the Australian economy and create more employment. And then only recently, when QUT divested, the resources, Queensland Resources Council, CEO Michael Roche came out and said that, I hope that hemp bicycles are now being ridden to QUT, and that I hope that QUT doesn't use any fossil fuels for any of air conditioning or any of that energy that they're using at their university, which is absolutely ridiculous, because we are talking about a transition plan, and these sorts of things don't just happen overnight, and divestment isn't just going to automatically bring down the fossil fuel industry. It's just one tool for creating the change that we need. And then also, only last week, so it's great that the QUT divestment story is actually doing the circles, and it's been 2 months since the university has said that they are divesting from fossil fuels. And then just last week, Senator McGrath said that he wanted Professor Coldrake to answer 4 written questions about the decision to cease fossil fuel investments. And more importantly, I thought that he said that given that council members have a fiduciary duty to achieve the best financial position, what financial strategy, benchmarks and controls have been in place to ensure the university is financially better off? And that again ties into neoliberalism, and I think that we've really moved away from institutions being a place of learning first and foremost, and now are just a part of the market. They're just a part of a corporation. And that really was shown too when the university decided to host that coal and gas and oil symposium, because that is the very reason why they also invest in fossil fuels in their endowment fund, because they're compromised. Okay, so why do I think that our work is important? Well, there's always been a history of students propelling social movements, and I strongly believe that climate resilience happens by working in our own communities. Sometimes climate change and climate justice seems like it's too large, it's too hard for anybody to tackle, but once we really rein it in, and people are working in their own communities. And for students at QUT, that's very localised. We know what happens in the classrooms, we know what happens in our lecture rooms, we know how the university is set up, by trying to dismantle all of the layers of bureaucracy within the institution, then we are able to instill greater change. And what QUT has done, what the Vice-Chancellor has really done is, there's been like a rippling effect after QUT said that they would consider divesting from fossil fuels, and that's impacted lots of other different communities and different grassroots organisations, and obviously also individuals to divest from their super accounts, from their banks, and it's creating that conversation. And that's really one of the most powerful things I think that the divestment movement is doing. It's a way for people to educate themselves and then take some form of action, which is a lot more empowering than I think what people used to do for Earth Hour, which was just once a year, turn off your lights. Creates a stronger narrative. which goes to the point of like very clear, very winnable campaign goal. We are really targeting key decision makers in our community. I guess also just touch on my personal story, which is why I think also encapsulates some of the really fantastic reasons for why lots of students are involved in the fossil free movement. Initially, I was really into like composting, gardening with my family, and I thought, yeah, this is how we tackle climate change. And then I saw a group of 8 students standing outside in front of QUT holding placards saying, Adani, you're not welcome here. And I was like, oh, who's Adani? And then I realised that they're the company that is planning to build the largest coal mine in the world. And then I started researching into the sponsorship ties that this university has with Adani, Shell, Xstrata, Rio Tinto. And I thought, wow, I wonder how many students actually know that this happens and how that really affects our learning. And so then I started looking more at that transparency side, I guess. And then recently, I guess there's been a bit of a transition in the climate movement to start talking about climate justice. And for Aboriginal peoples, they've been fighting for country and for sustainability for at least like the last 40,000 years. And that's something that still the environment movement needs to really be focusing on, because currently there is a bit of an unstable relationship. I know within the student movement, we're all pretty much like from middle class white backgrounds, and then therefore that affects who is speaking at events, that affects the messaging that we have, because still in the environmental movement we are tokenising a lot of black people. I mean, in the environment movement, I don't think we are focusing enough on the fact that Aboriginal peoples are incarcerated 15 times the amount that non-Indigenous peoples are. And they're the ones that are meant to have the narrative, right, that should be converging with the narrative of the rise in technology that enables us to move towards a just transition. Not just a decarbonised economy, but something where everybody feels valued and that they have a purpose in our society, which really does stem from the epistemologies and ontologies that Indigenous peoples have always had. And so I think that does give a little bit of a snapshot into the types of people that work within fossil-free universities, and that we have like a range of opinions and ideas. So also just want to touch on the fact that students are really creative, and if we always do what we always do, then we're not going to get anywhere. This was Fossil Free Melbourne University during Flood the Campus, and honestly, like, this photo was circulating social media for months. So we really know how to get a message across. And then finally, I was just going to mention Divest Harvard, which Dr. Professor Rimmer just mentioned before. And so Divest Harvard has actually challenged Harvard University in court, and they seek a permanent injunction requiring Harvard to immediately sell their direct holdings in fossil fuel companies, and also to begin divesting their indirect holdings in those companies. Unfortunately, they did fail, but with the movement of the fossil-free divest sort of undercurrenting that the legal challenge, it means that they do have something to fall back onto when the legal systems fail us. And eventually, though, I do hope that the judiciary sort of reflects the voices of the community, which sometimes, I guess, isn't happening because of the neoliberal sort of logics that occur in our society. So I guess I'll just finish off with this quote that was really eloquently written as part of the Divest Harvard case. Short-term profits cannot justify the spread of scientific falsehoods, the corruption of the political process and endless production of dirty fuels, fossil fuels, that stands in the way of a clean energy future. Our courts must defend the public interest in a healthy climate and recognise the duty of investors and governments to curtail carbon emissions. Today, despite the strength of our legal arguments in favour of divestment, the status quo prevailed over judicial imagination. Thank you.